What is worse than death? For the ancient Romans, it was to be forgotten, to have your name, your face, your very existence erased from history as if you never were. This is the story of Damnatio Memoriae, the art of destroying a ghost. Imagine a power so absolute that it could reach back in time and obliterate a person from the collective memory of an entire civilization. This wasn't the work of sorcerers or gods, but of men in togas, sitting in the hallowed halls of the Roman Senate. They called it Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was more than just punishment. It was the ultimate act of social and political annihilation, a verdict reserved for those deemed the most vile enemies of the state. Tyrants, traitors, conspirators, and emperors who had failed so catastrophically that their very legacy was considered a poison to the Republic and later the Empire. The process was brutally systematic, a state-sanctioned campaign of erasure. Imagine the sheer, raw violence of it. Across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, orders would go out. Statues, once objects of reverence, were toppled and smashed. Bronze effigies were melted down, their metal repurposed, perhaps into a statue of the very man who ordered the destruction. Marble portraits were meticulously defaced, a chisel carefully striking the nose, the eyes, the mouth, until the once proud face was an unrecognizable, scarred ruin. It was a public spectacle, a lesson for all to see. This is the fate of those who betray Rome. But the condemnation didn't stop with physical monuments. It was an attack on every record, every trace of existence. Armies of stonemasons would be dispatched to public buildings, arches, and monuments. They would climb ladders and scaffolding, their task to find a single hated name and painstakingly chisel it out of the inscription, leaving a conspicuous, gaping hole in the stone, a testament not to absence, but to deliberate removal. It was a scar on the face of history itself. The purge extended into the private sphere. Portraits in the homes of the elite were taken down and destroyed. Frescoes depicting the condemned were painted over. Every piece of papyrus, every wax tablet bearing their name, was a target for destruction. Even the currency of the realm was not safe. Coins were one of the most powerful propaganda tools of the ancient world, spreading an emperor's image to the furthest corners of the empire. Under Damnatio Memoriae, these coins were recalled and restruck, or the faces were manually scratched away. It was an attempt to wipe a person from the daily lives of millions. Legally, the act was just as profound. All laws passed by a condemned emperor were nullified. Their last will and testament was declared void, their property seized by the state. Their children might even be forced to change their family name. The goal was simple and terrifying: to ensure that future generations would know nothing of the person who had once held immense power. The Senate, in passing this decree, was not just killing a man's legacy. They were attempting to perform a retroactive execution on his entire life to make him a ghost in his own history. They sought to create a perfect silence, a void where a person once stood. But erasing a memory is not so simple. The empty spaces, the broken statues, the scratched-out names, they don't create silence, they create a question. And the first question begins with the most hated emperor in Roman history. The most hated emperor, a man whose crimes were so monstrous, Rome decided he must cease to exist. His name was Domitian. To understand why an entire empire would try to delete a man from its own history, you have to understand the man himself. Domitian wasn't born to rule. He was the younger son of Emperor Vespasian, the man who built the Colosseum. While his father and older brother, Titus, were celebrated military heroes, Domitian was left behind in Rome, a footnote in his own family's story. He grew up in the shadow of giants, and that shadow bred a deep, simmering resentment. When his father and then his brother died, Domitian finally got his chance. He ascended to the throne in 81 AD, and at first, things seemed fine. He was an efficient, if stern, administrator. He stabilized the economy and strengthened Rome's borders. But beneath the surface, the poison of paranoia was already spreading. He saw conspiracies everywhere, enemies in every shadow. He trusted no one. His magnificent new palace on the Palatine Hill became a golden cage. The walls were lined with highly polished moonstone, not just for decoration, but so he could see reflections of anyone sneaking up behind him. He began referring to himself as Dominus et Deus, Master and God. Senators were forced to bow and scrape before him, and those who didn't show enough reverence often disappeared. He unleashed a reign of terror, using a network of informants to accuse wealthy citizens of treason, seizing their property and executing them on flimsy evidence. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a predator, and the Roman Senate was his hunting ground. The fear in Rome was palpable. No one was safe. Senators would leave for the Senate house in the morning, not knowing if they would return home to their families that night. The atmosphere was suffocating. Domitian had turned the heart of the empire into his own personal horror show. But when you push people too far, when you rule by fear alone, that fear eventually turns to courage. A conspiracy began to form, not in the shadows of the Senate, but within the very walls of Domitian's own palace. His own wife, his chamberlains, the very people he relied on every day, decided the monster had to be stopped. The day was September 18th, 96 AD. A palace steward named Stephanus approached the emperor, claiming he had uncovered a plot. He had his arm wrapped in a woolen bandage, pretending it was injured. As Domitian leaned in to read the list of supposed conspirators, Stephanus pulled a dagger from the bandage and plunged it into the emperor's groin. The attack was savage and desperate. Domitian, a physically powerful man, fought back fiercely. He screamed for his guards as he grappled with Stephanus. Other conspirators, members of his own staff, burst into the room and joined the attack. It was a bloody, chaotic mess. In the end, the self-proclaimed master and god lay dead on his own floor, stabbed multiple times by the very people he thought he controlled. The news spread like wildfire. The Senate, which had lived in terror for years, erupted not in mourning, but in celebration. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted him gone. They immediately passed a decree of Damnatio Memoriae, the damnation of memory. It was the ultimate punishment. The Roman state would officially forget that Domitian had ever existed. What followed was a spectacle of organized rage. Across the vast Roman Empire, a campaign of erasure began. Crowds cheered as ropes were thrown around Domitian's countless statues, pulling the bronze and marble effigies from their pedestals to be smashed to pieces or melted down. His face was chiseled off public reliefs. His name was violently scraped from inscriptions. If you go to Rome today and look at the magnificent arch of Titus, celebrating the Roman victory in Jerusalem, you can still see the evidence. On one of the inscriptions, there's a strange, empty, rough-hewn patch. That's where the name Domitian used to be, painstakingly carved out by order of the Senate. They were trying to create a hole in history, a void where a tyrant once stood. For a time, it worked. The official records were changed. The coins were reminted. It was as if 15 years of Roman history, the reign of an emperor, had simply vanished. Rome had erased its monster. But sometimes, when you try to erase a ghost, you accidentally create a legend. And no legend is more mysterious than the woman who vanished from the Colosseum. A woman who vanished. A face erased from the walls of the Colosseum itself. Who was she, and why was she so feared? To find the answer, we have to travel back more than 2,000 years to the bloody, chaotic, final days of the Roman Republic. This isn't just a story about a forgotten figure. It's a tale of ambition, power, and a woman who dared to challenge the man who would become Rome's first emperor. Her name was Fulvia, and in an age where women were expected to be silent and subordinate, Fulvia was a storm. She wasn't born into one of the great aristocratic families, but through a series of strategic marriages, she amassed incredible wealth and political influence. Her third husband, none other than the legendary Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man. But Fulvia was no mere wife. She was his partner, his political strategist, and when he was away, she was his voice in Rome. After Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome was torn apart by civil war. Power was split between three men, Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Caesar's young, ambitious heir, Octavian, the future emperor Augustus. While Antony was in the east, falling for a certain Egyptian queen, Octavian was back in Italy, consolidating his power. He started seizing land from Italian farmers to pay his veterans, a move that caused widespread outrage. And this is where Fulvia stepped onto the main stage of history. She saw Octavian's actions not just as an injustice, but as a direct threat to her husband's power and her own family's future. She refused to stand by. Taking her young children with her, she rallied disillusioned senators and angry farmers. She became the face of the opposition. Imagine the scene: a woman standing before legions of hardened Roman soldiers, delivering fiery speeches, raising funds, and directly challenging the authority of Caesar's heir. She even minted coins with her own face on them, an unprecedented act for a Roman woman, a declaration of power that put her on par with the men who ruled the world. She and Antony's brother, Lucius, raised 8 legions, that's nearly 40,000 soldiers, and launched a full-scale war against Octavian. It's known as the Pyrrhusine War. For a time, it looked like they might actually win. They captured Rome for a brief period. Fulvia, this single woman, was effectively the most powerful person in Italy, holding the future of the Republic in her hands. But Octavian was a ruthless and brilliant military commander. He besieged Fulvia and Lucius in the city of Perusia. After a brutal winter of starvation, they were forced to surrender. Octavian, in a show of cold fury, executed the city's entire council, but, surprisingly, spared Lucius and Fulvia. Why? Because killing the wife and brother of Mark Antony would have meant a war he could not yet win. Instead, he chose a different kind of weapon: character assassination. Octavian's propagandists went into overdrive. They painted Fulvia as a power-hungry, unnatural woman, a monster who wore a sword and defied the proper order of things. They spread vile rumors and crude jokes, trying to dismantle her reputation and turn public opinion against her. Exiled from Italy, Fulvia sailed to Greece to meet Antony, hoping to regroup and convince him to continue the fight. But the political winds had shifted. Antony, seeking to repair his alliance with Octavian, met her not with support, but with blame. He accused her of overstepping her bounds and starting a war he didn't want. Shortly after, abandoned and politically ruined, Fulvia fell ill and died. It was a convenient end for both Antony and Octavian. With her gone, they could reconcile, and they sealed their new pact with a marriage. Antony married Octavian's own sister, Octavia. Fulvia was simply swept aside, and then came the final, most brutal act of vengeance, Damnatio Memoriae, the damnation of memory. A concerted effort was made to erase her from history itself. Her name was chiseled off public monuments, statues were likely torn down, records were altered. She was to be forgotten, a ghost in the annals of Rome, a cautionary tale of a woman who flew too close to the sun. The empty spaces you see on ancient monuments, like those in the Colosseum, are often silent testaments to this practice of void where a person once stood, celebrated. Fulvia was one of them, erased for daring to be as ambitious and ruthless as the men who wrote the history books. But here's the beautiful, defiant truth. They failed. Damnatio Memoriae never truly works. Whispers survive. A fragment of a scroll here, a mention in a private letter there, a coin bearing her defiant face dug up from the earth to millennia later. History has a long memory, and it always finds a way to speak the names of its forgotten ghosts. Fulvia's story wasn't just lost, it was buried. But it proves that even the most powerful empires cannot fully silence a voice that dared to roar. Her legacy is a reminder that the stories we are told are shaped by the victors, and that the most fascinating tales are often the ones they tried the hardest to erase. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through history's forgotten corners. We pour our hearts into making these stories, and if you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It is the single best way to support what we do and ensure we can keep digging up these incredible lost tales. We're a small team, and every single one of you makes a huge difference. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.